Order. Welcome to meeting number 5 of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, pursuant to the motion adopted in the House on February 8, 2022. The committee is meeting today to study the desecration of monuments honoring veterans. I would like to welcome our new member and colleague, Ms. Kathy Wagenthal, and also welcome our colleague, Brenda Shanahan, who is replacing another member this evening.
Placed in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of November 25, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So, you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Today's meeting is also taking place in a webinar format. Webinars are for public committee meetings and are available only to members, their staff, and witnesses. Members enter immediately as active participants. All functionalities for active participants remain the same. Staff will be non-active participants and can therefore only view the meeting in gallery view. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. En ce qui concerne la liste des personnes,
regarding the list of those who will be speaking, the committee's clerk and myself will do our best to respect the speaking order set out for all members, be they here in person or joining us remotely. I would now like to welcome our witness from the Royal Canadian Legion, Mr. Stephen Clark, who is the National Executive Director of that institution. We will hear his opening remarks. You have 5 minutes, sir, to present your statement before we move into a question period. Without further ado, I turn the floor over to Mr. Stephen Clark to please turn on your microphone and share your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the invitation to the Royal Canadian Legion to appear before you today. I am Stephen Clark, National Executive Director. I am a veteran, and I also served for 10 years as the Director of Canada's National Remembrance Day ceremony held at the National War Memorial. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, positioned in front of the memorial, was a Millennium Project initiated by the Legion, adding to the special significance this sacred site has to our organization. The Legion is a large national organization united around a mission that has remained unchanged for our almost 100 years of existence: support veterans, serve our communities and country, and promote remembrance. The Legion has undertaken numerous remembrance initiatives to bring focus to service and sacrifice, such as the Poppy Campaign, where upwards of 20 million poppies are distributed annually throughout the country as a visual pledge to never forget. The yearly poster and literary contest, with participation by 100,000 students each year who show what remembrance means to them through their artistic works and literary compositions, and the virtual poppy drop projection on Centre Block in the Senate of Canada building. Legion commands and branches also organize and conduct remembrance ceremonies at memorials and cenotaphs in communities nationwide. And yet, despite these large-scale and other widespread remembrance efforts, there are those who just do not or choose not to understand service and sacrifice. Memorials and monuments are community gathering places for commemorations. They are a physical presence, standing as important symbols of our commitment to honor and remember, and they establish a historical link from the present to our military heritage. They are to be revered, but sadly, they are not free from desecration. For example, 2006, 3 males were caught urinating on the National War Memorial. At that time, there were calls for more security at the site. 2009, the provincial cenotaph in Fredericton was vandalized. In 2012, the Inukshuk Memorial for Afghan Veterans, erected at Legion headquarters in Ottawa, was toppled. The individual responsible for desecrating this memorial, donated by Richard and Claire Leger, the National Silver Cross Mother in 2005, never owned up to their actions. And just last year in 2021, the memorial wall in Cranbrook, British Columbia was vandalized. Now, these are just 4 examples of disrespect. How society responds to such reprehensible acts is paramount. Some countries have introduced or enacted bills to address the desecration of war memorials, but it is so unfortunate that governments have had to legislate penalties as a deterrent to such inexcusable action, rather than an individual's understanding of respect and application of common sense and personal decency. If not corrected, ruinous behavior has a penchant for repetition. As a society, a government, an organization, an individual, we all have a responsibility to protect the sanctity of memorials and to preserve the memory of the fallen. Memorials are symbols of a grateful nation's collective reminiscence, where we pause to honor, thank, and remember them. With reference to the National War Memorial of late, appropriating this sacred site for use as a backdrop for displays of disobedience and inappropriate messaging, or for attempts to legitimize or push an alternate agenda beyond one with a purely remembrance focus, or to stand by and idly watch as these things take place, especially by those in a position of civil authority, is simply wrong. We need to do better. Our fallen deserves better. Mr. Chair, the Legion thanks you and the committee for the opportunity to make this presentation as part of this important study.
So thank you very much, Mr. Clark. And now let's start with the round of questioning. And I invite the first vice president of the committee, Mr. Frank Caputo, for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank Mr. Clark for coming, and it's indeed a pleasure to see him again. Pardon me, I'm just bringing up some wording here, but one question I had for Mr. Clark, he mentioned that there was some criminal code, legal provisions, and actually, before I even do that, I want to thank Mr. Clark for his service, first and foremost, and for appearing. Now, the criminal law does address this in a fairly recently passed law. I'm not sure if Mr. Clark is aware of it, that it is in relation to a war memorial under mischief, Section 430 of the Criminal Code. I'm not sure if Mr. Clark is aware of that provision.
I am aware of that provision, yes.
Okay. Obviously, you had mentioned in your opening statement that we need to do better and there are problems, and you cited a number of examples of reprehensible behavior that I'm sure that everybody on this committee would denounce. Now, do you have any opinion, sir, somebody in your position on behalf of the Legion, as to whether these provisions are adequate or appropriate?
It's an important question, but a difficult one to answer, because it should be inherent in everyone that you absolutely don't do these things, as we have witnessed of late. But yet there has to be some kind of protection afforded memorials when actions go beyond what they should be. And the Act identifies penalties, could be a monetary penalty, but we have to understand what is the value of the penalties that are put in place. If a monetary penalty was a deterrent to such horrible action, people would never get a second speeding ticket or parking ticket. Financial penalties are not always the answer. We have to take a look at other ways that we can bring justice to those who commit these. They're needed, unfortunately, but I don't know if it's the full answer.
I see. Well, I respect what you have to say. In fact, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the penalty is exactly the same, for instance, as impaired driving, and a lot of people, do that more than once. So I take your points on that. Now, when you say there needs to be more, are you talking about a stricter punishment under the code, as in there should be incarceration, or perhaps a different way of dealing with this?
Different way of dealing with it.
Okay.
Back in 2006, when one of the gentlemen that was caught urinating on the memorial, he didn't receive a financial penalty for his infraction. However, it was a day of restorative justice. He came to Legion headquarters. He spoke with veterans. He learned about the importance of remembrance. He spent time. That, I think, had a much greater impact on him and his future actions than if he had paid a fine of $1,000.
Well, I take your point, and it's through the chair. I take your point, sir, and it's interesting that what you described is what we call, restorative justice or alternative dispute resolution, which is actually a step below a criminal charge. Which I don't know about the jurisdiction in Ontario, but in British Columbia, any prosecutor actually has that discretion to do that. So that's an interesting thought on that, and I respect exactly what you said there. Now, when we look at these things, there's obviously has to be a balance of access and protection. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That is a very important question, and you hit it right on the head, that we have to make sure these memorials are protected, but we also cannot be so restrictive that we prevent public access to it. So how do you accomplish that? I and the Legion would not want to see anything permanent in place that would impede an individual's want, need, or desire to pay their personal respects, because it's a very personal expression, how you remember someone. But at the same time, you have to make sure that the memorials are protected. Perhaps as a first step, we need to focus on signage. There is currently a sign in front of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier saying that here lie the remains of a Canadian unknown soldier. Please treat this grave with respect. But that's not always the case. And it's not in an obvious place. But the intent was to not make it obvious. Maybe we need to do a little better job of where we position certain things.
Okay, I take your point.
Oui, d'accord. J'ai bien compris, car
the attention should be on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, not deterring the group of people, big or small as they may be, who really don't recognize the sanctity of that space. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, I think I'm probably coming up close to my time here, and I don't want to run.
Exactly. Very nice. Thank you, Mr. Caputo. And right now, for 6 minutes, let's go to Ms. Richie Valdez. Please open your mic.
Good evening, colleagues and Mr. Chair. I just want to take a moment and thank you also, Mr. Clark, for your sacrifice to serve our country. And just for being here and being a valuable witness to all of us on this important study. While we are here in committee, we just need to acknowledge that there is a war taking place on the other side of the world. President Putin's war on Ukraine is a war on freedom, on democracy, and on the rights of Ukrainians and all people. We continue to stand with Ukraine, its people, and the Ukrainian Canadian community here in Canada. Mr. Clark, in your opening remarks, I agree with you. Like, as a society and as an individual, we all have a responsibility to protect the sanctity of memorials and to preserve the memory of the fallen. And the reason why this motion was put forward is so that we do our part as a committee so that the disrespectful behavior is not repeated. So, Mr. Clark, can you describe what you feel when our memorials and monuments are desecrated, and particularly the ones in the most recent example that you saw last month?
There are feelings of condemnation, anger, disgust, and bewilderment that people would not understand what these memorials stand for.
Thank you. Our soldiers and veterans like yourself risked your life and fought for our freedom. And these are freedoms which we should all be very grateful that we have today. I know I'm very appreciative of it. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, as you mentioned, was a special project, and in your remarks you said it was initiated by the Legion. What comments do you have for the individual who was captured in the videos that we've seen, who was standing on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier screaming the words freedom?
You know, it's interesting when you talk about freedom, especially what we see in other parts of the world going on right now, and how ironic that freedom could be misinterpreted in the way that it was. It is unfortunate, however, that the individual who was dancing on the tomb was fully aware of the sanctity of that site, what the site stood for, and what the tomb stood for, because the military officer that spoke to that group just prior to her taking this action explained that. And as soon as he turned to leave, she jumped on the tomb and did what she did. That makes it even that much more horrible, because she fully understood what she was doing and acted in defiance. I have to shake my head sometime at an interpretation or a definition that people have of freedom. The freedom to dance atop a tomb is not one of those.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Agree with you there. In an attempt to secure the monument's barricades and barriers, there were, barricades put up and they were bolted, and unfortunately, the Ottawa protesters took them down. What can you say about these actions?
The Legion did not agree with those barricades being taken down. But it was interesting, when we put out that statement on the 12th of February, the response that we had back was split. Half of the people that we heard from supported the Legion's position on not taking those barricades down because we did need to make sure that site remained safe. But the other half responded with extreme negativity and hatred to the point of threatening Legion headquarters' social media team. We were called woke anti-veteran extremists who are pushing the propaganda of mainstream media and spewing prime ministerial talking points. It was unbelievable, the response that we had received. But regardless, we stand with our position that the intent of those barricades was not to be permanent. It was a temporary safeguarding measure, and it was important to be respected.
Thank you. The Department of Public Works and Government Services mentioned, similar to what you were saying, that delicate balance between providing free access to monuments while protecting them during protests. Can you provide your input on, the choice that we have between access versus protecting them?
It comes to priority. The priority at the time was making sure that that memorial was safe so that in the future, in the very near future, we would all have free access to be able to pay our respects in the way that we would personally choose to. So as a temporary measure, it was important and it should have been respected. So we were fully supportive of that barricade in a temporary capacity, but not in a permanent capacity.
Thank you. And in your opinion, what can be done further to protect our memorials and monuments? I do like the idea that you brought up before, as far as how we could give penalties to those who do disrespectful behavior. But is there any other ideas that you can share with us today?
A lot of it comes down to education and awareness. We have to do a better job of educating, and it starts with youth, and to make sure that the public is aware. In a perfect world, there would be a federal department that would look after the curriculum in schools across the country, but that's not the case. It's all provincially directed. So there is no standardization of what is taught through the school system. Ideally, we would love to have greater emphasis on history. Legion branches, Legion members focus on that during the remembrance period every year. I'd like to see something grander and more standardized across the country, but that's a pipe dream.
Thank you. In my writing of Mississauga Streetsville, I proudly have a Legion 139, and the work that they do is tremendous. So thank you, Mr. Clark, for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Clark, as you know, we have interpretation. So right now, je vais passer au deuxième vice-président, qui est Monsieur Luc Desilets.
I will turn to the second vice president, Mr. Luc Desilets. You have 6 minutes, sir. Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much, Mr. Clark, for being here. It's such a pleasure to hear you, to hear what you know, what you have lived through, your knowledge. Extremely interesting. There is something I really picked up on earlier, and forgive me for being so ignorant, but I have, on a few occasions, been at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Are there any panels up describing what that site is, and is there anything that bars certain types of behavior?
Other than the plaque that is inset in the ground in front of the tomb. And in fact, having interpretive panels around the site is something that the Legion had brought up a number of years ago. Had initial discussions with Canadian Heritage, but we did not pursue that further. Perhaps now is the time to do that so that we can talk about not only the tomb and what it is there and stands for, but also the inscriptions that are on the memorial, First, Second World War, Afghanistan, South African War, so that people can get a better understanding of exactly what the sanctity of this site represents.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I once was the principal of a school, and it's not always sufficient to explain things to young people at school. The idea of having panels, perhaps some limits, some restrictions that may seem, ridiculous, but we do have young adults and even some adults who would better understand the importance, the significance, and the symbolism of it all, were we to do so. I would strongly encourage you to take that into consideration. If you have a 25-year-old who behaves in a very unfortunate way on a symbolic monument, doesn't have, seems to have the mental capacity of a 15-year-old. But, well, I think it's a matter of educating. You alluded in your statement to the fact that 10 years ago there was a memorial in Ottawa dedicated to Afghan veterans that was also vandalized and desecrated. What struck me was that no one was held responsible. We know who undertook this behavior, but no one was actually held responsible for it. Why?
Interesting question, but I have to say one thing about that. The monument was extremely heavy, so to topple it was a deliberate act. The outpouring of support from the community to help restore, replace, shore up that memorial was simply outstanding. But one thing that did strike me, for weeks afterward, that memorial was tended to and kept clean and kept free of any kind of debris or rocks or grass or anything. So in my mind, I thought whoever perpetrated that act perhaps had a moment of reflection, realized what they did was wrong, and as their way of penance, took care of that memorial. Completely unfounded, but I would like to think that whoever did it initially realized the error of their ways and tried to make amends.
Ce serait bien si c'était le cas.
How nice it would be if that were the case. Do you have any recommendations? We will be making recommendations to the House based on this event, which, of course, took place in a very unusual circumstance, Ottawa being occupied by thousands of people, some from the far right. Do you have any recommendations to make about protecting the monument?
I want to see anything permanent in place because, again, remembrance is a very personal expression of honor and thanks, so we don't want to do anything that's permanent. Having signage in place would help. We need to focus also on education. Veterans Affairs Canada does a superb job at the teaching materials that they make available to schools and youth, all free of charge. That needs to continue to receive support. And it's simply raising awareness. That is where we need to start. And again, to start with our youth. That's why I'm so focused on the importance of education and not to regulate remembrance. That's important, that we have to make sure that it remains spontaneous. So whatever we do, we can't regulate it.
Regardez, je suis tout à fait d'accord avec vous, puis la répression ne donne pas nécessairement.
I fully agree with you, and repression doesn't necessarily lead to positive results. In your programming, are there any elements that has to do with the importance, the symbolism of monuments and memorial monuments? And would it be wise to advertise this a little more broadly?
The Legion produces every year a teaching guide that we make available to teachers across the country to talk about the importance of various remembrance initiatives and symbols, with memorials being one. We have been asked from time to time if memorials glorify war, and it could not be further from the truth. Memorials are an expression, a remembrance of what those before us have done so that we are in the position that we are in society. So we have to make sure that people understand exactly what the memorials stand for. But interestingly, the Canadian Memorial Database is a repository of 8,200 known memorials and cenotaphs across the country. So there are virtually memorials in every community. It's important that that community, those students, liaise to understand.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clark. And votre tour, Monsieur Desilets, c'est terminé.
Your time is out, Mr. Desilets.
Turn the mic to Miss Rachel Blaney for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Clark. It's very good to see you again here before the committee. And I, of course, want to thank you for your service in the many ways that you have done that service. And I think that needs to be recognized as well. And I think, for me, this is really sad. It's really hard that we have to have this discussion. And I think it's important that people understand what this means. It's a place of remembrance, and constituents, I'm from BC, have flown all the way to Ottawa, and I've met with them, and we've gone to the tomb. They're either veterans or they are the loved ones of people who have served, and they've brought mementos, and those mementos are received, and then they're taken underneath and held there. And people feel such gratefulness that the picture of their loved one, that some memento is there, that it's held. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak to the committee, but also to all Canadians, about how important this particular memorial is across this country, and how much more than it is what we see above ground, but what's below and held in remembrance.
Absolutely. You have to look back at when the government first started the competition to construct this memorial back in 1925. Their vision at that time was to keep alive the spirit of heroism, self-sacrifice. They wanted to represent everything that was noble and great, exemplified by those who have sacrificed their lives at that time in the First World War. And people who stop by the memorial now and leave mementos of their loved ones, who in fact are one of those 118,000 Canadians who have fallen in the service of the country, it is their connection with their lost loved one, with an individual who no longer has a voice, yet are represented by monuments and memorials such as this one. It's very important to establish that connection and keep the connection. So knowing that whatever they leave will not be discarded, but will be retained, is personally satisfying to those individuals. And I'm so happy that that continues.
Well, thank you for that. And, that was probably one of the most concerning parts for me. I read an article about a veteran who had seen that people were parking near the monument, and he went there to take photos of their license plates because he wanted them to be held to account, as I think many veterans would feel, and sadly was physically threatened with violence. And I just thought, what a terrible outcome of this situation. So I guess my next question is really about acknowledging the trauma that this kind of desecration could have on people who have served our country. Today, I'm here in Campbell River, and we have the Wounded Warriors that I know that the Legion supports that are doing a run right now to fundraise, to bring awareness to people about post-traumatic stress disorder, to understand that our veterans, our military, our frontline folks who are on the front lines of, our police, our firefighters, our paramedics, like they're out there fighting and they have this. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to the impact, the maybe unintentional. I will assume that some of the veterans that were there who felt that they were protecting that, I want to respect that. But I also want to respect that the impact that we just saw could have had a profound effect on people, especially those who have served and are struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Absolutely. And in fact, we heard from our Legion OSI special section about that very thing, that that memorial stands for all who have served and fallen in the military service. It's not for one particular mission or war. But of late, the war in Afghanistan, we've seen 40,000 Canadian Armed Forces members participate in that particular operation. And our OSI section was contacted by people who were so adversely affected by what they had seen. And it felt like a personal disrespect that had been made to those individuals. And it's just very hard to vocalize the impact that you as an individual who served your country are seeing now, the disrespect that are shown by the people that you thought were supporting you when you went overseas. And I know that the special section reached out to those individuals as much as they could. They offered sessions where they could get together to talk about it, because discussing and talking helps alleviate the pain, but the pain never goes away, and this act worsens it.
Well, I know I only have a minute left, and I really want to acknowledge how much you've made it clear that the importance of public access cannot be minimized.
No.
I'm just wondering, would it maybe be appropriate to have protocols that when we know larger protest, or in this case, an occupation is coming, that maybe we protect the monuments? And there's more than just the tomb. Of course, we've got the Korean War one just down the street, the Aboriginal one. Would that be a good step, that we put those protective ones up right away before the people even arrive, to sort of set that tone of respect?
Absolutely. Preparedness is key. Take a look at previous large-scale occupations or protests. 2002, the G8, take the streets, Ottawa protest. We would have learned from that. Policing agencies would have learned. Apply what you've learned.
Thank you, Miss Blenheim. Thank you, Mr. Clark. And for the next 5 minutes, the questions will be asked by Miss Anna Roberts. Please open your mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to also thank Mr. Clark. We respect you and appreciate everything you do, and to help us have the freedoms and enjoy the freedoms that we do in this country. It's very important to me. I guess we have two monuments in my riding, and this year I witnessed both of them. And what I really appreciated them doing was having the children from the school participate. Now, because of the lockdowns, unfortunately, things were scaled back. But in the past, we have had the opportunity. One of our monuments is in a community center area. And so the veterans come into the community, and, there's a small gesture where we offer, tea, coffee, cookies, whatever. And the young children are allowed to come and speak with them and learn about the war and understand the reason that they live in a society like ours is because we had people like yourself that went and fought for our freedoms. You mentioned earlier about education, and my question is, would you not agree that it would be more important to have the one-on-one personal aspect in the education prior to Remembrance Day, and have the young children involved to better understand why we do have these freedoms?
Absolutely. Having a base knowledge, that main level of understanding is important. This supplements or enhances that. And that speaks to what John McCrae talked about in Flanders Fields about passing the torch. You're passing on information, you're passing on lived experiences, and it's important to get those lived experiences while the veterans are still here to share that information. It's extremely important, and I agree with you.
So when these acts, I call them acts of violence, occur, would it not be beneficial that the individuals, you mentioned earlier that really a financial situation is no benefit, would it not be a combination of both? Have the financial burden put on the individual, but also have that individual commit to either participating with the Legion, understanding, speaking to veterans, maybe even volunteering. We ask our students in Ontario that they have to have so many hours in order to obtain their high school diploma. Would this not treat it as a punishment, but maybe as a learning experience that they could go back and maybe speak to their classmates or other adults, depending on who the perpetrator is?
Definitely. The Legion has been involved in a couple instances, exactly as you explained, but you added on a very good point that I did not. It's great that the individual understands from a personal perspective of veterans and what they've gone through, but then they go back and pass on that information. And I think that's very important. And I like that they are sharing what they have learned. So hopefully others will learn from their experiences. That is a very good point.
Because I have to tell you, I remember the stories from my grandfather and his experiences in the war, which I found it was very difficult for him to speak about. But it made me realize why we have the freedoms here. And I'm just wondering, sometimes, you know, young children, it's so crucial for them to learn at a young age that we could maybe implement this to stop these incidents. Because let's be honest, the younger they are, the quicker they learn, the better adults they become. I liked what you said about the financial situation is not always the way to do it. So could there be something that we could implement into the rules that would force or mandate individuals to do that?
That would be very productive if it could be done, to actually say that in addition or along with or instead of a financial penalty, that there be an opportunity, that there be a requirement that the individual spend time with a veterans organization or a school or a veteran. That could be very easily set up, and I think the knowledge gained and the impact would be invaluable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I only have a minute left. So with the construction of any new monuments, would you say that the benefit of signage and education to make people realize that these are the consequences should these acts continue would be something that should be posted where people can clearly read them?
I would not be supportive of that. Okay. I think what we need to do is stress exactly why the memorials are here, but to make reference to what could happen if you disrespect it would not be the way to go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Et maintenant, nous allons passer à notre collègue.
We will now hear from our colleague, Mr. Rogers, for 5 minutes, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our guest, Mr. Clark, and thank you for your service and the things you do on behalf of veterans and legions across the country. And like you and many other Canadians, I too was disgusted to see such blatant disrespect for the War Memorial site in Ottawa, and was very disturbed to see what was going on. But I'd like to focus my attention a little bit on legions and what they do for our communities and across the country. So thank you for everything you do to work with legions across Canada. In fact, I have 10 legions in my riding of Bonavista-Beer and Trinity, and I'm so proud of the work that they do for veterans, active military members and their families, and the community at large. I'm wondering if you can explain some of the services that legions offer and why you think it is important to keep local legions at the heart of our local communities.
From a service perspective, the main goal of Legion branches is to support veterans for the care that they need. We are blessed by the generosity of Canadians to have POPI funds available to provide that emergency assistance to veterans who find themselves in need. And that is the core of what the organization does. But in addition to that, Legion branches also serve as a community hub, or a cornerstone of the community is what we have called it. You will find Legion branches all across the country in communities large and small, and it's a place where people gather for a variety of reasons, whether it's happy times or not so happy times. But it's important that there be a gathering location and a spot where people in the community can come together in unity for a purpose. The work of Legions across the country is so important so that we can continue to make sure that veterans receive those supports. And also, as we're talking about today, ensuring that we perpetuate remembrance, that we never get that from our site. It's always important that we promote remembrance on every occasion that we can.
I agree, Mr. Clark. As a former high school teacher and administrator and a former mayor of a small community, we engaged regularly with Legions and veterans on Remembrance Day and other ceremonies throughout the year. Mr. Clark, over the last couple of years, of course, with COVID-19 pandemic, every industry and community has been affected, and nobody's been immune from having to adjust and cope with frequently changing circumstances. So can you maybe describe how Legions across Canada have dealt with and adjusted their operations because of the pandemic, and how resilient they have been during that period?
I continue to be, throughout the pandemic, impressed by the ingenuity of Legion branches across the country. Currently, as of last week, we still have 7% of our branches that have not opened since March of 2020. 27% of our branches are fully open, and the rest with varying degrees. So the pandemic is still not behind us from an operations point of view. The Royal Canadian Legion was extremely grateful to the Government of Canada for the Veterans Organization Emergency Support Fund that was provided. That was a hand up. I'm not calling it a handout, but a hand up to Legion branches nationwide. 998 branches received assistance through that program, and it was a lifeline for them. Now, it enabled them to continue on with their operations, but they had to supplement it. So whether it was through other fundraising initiatives or simply reaching out to the community, that's how they continued on with their operations, and community support was key.
Yeah, and I agree. I've received numerous phone calls and talked to members of the different Legions throughout Bonavista, Beer, and Trinity seeking support, and I was happy to see that we were able to deliver some support. And I'm not sure if you have any other ideas about how to provide other levels of support from either the federal, provincial governments or communities at large.
Branches are autonomous, and they are responsible for their own affairs. And this reaching out to the government for the VOESF was the first time the Legion did that in its 100-year history. And I don't foresee that. We need to make sure that we look after our own operations. I appreciate the sentiment, but we need to progress internally.
Yeah, I agree. And it's good to hear that, actually. Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if...
No, it's over. Yeah, it's over. Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Yes, so maintenant, nous allons passer à...
Now, we will have shorter question periods, 2.5 minutes only. To begin with, Mr. Luc Désilets, Member of Désilets, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Clark, if you have brief answers, I've got 2 questions. Given what's going on these days, others have referred to this atrocious war now underway. Do you think that young people are paying more attention to concepts of self-sacrifice and giving of yourself to support a cause?
Look back to Afghanistan. Prior to that, an individual's connection with war may have been the Second World War grandfather or great uncles. Afghanistan brought it to the family, brought it to the neighbors, and we're seeing the same thing now with Ukraine. People are more aware and understanding.
Merci. Vous avez fait référence tantôt.
Thank you. You referred to monetary penalties. Would it be relevant to choose rather community work, involvement with veterans groups for people who behave in the ways we've been discussing, pillaging, and so they would have to upkeep or clean monuments? Would that be smarter, better than monetary penalties?
Would. School children in the Netherlands do this not out of a penalty, but out of a sense of obligation. And having this as a requirement for people who are convicted of such atrocities, absolutely. I would certainly support that.
Merci. C'est tout pour moi, monsieur.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Clark, for your clear answers. Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Now we will go to Ms. Blaney, 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you again, Chair. And I just have to say this conversation is so thoughtful, and I really appreciate it. And, you know, I represent a riding that has 11 legions, and I've done some very interesting remembrance days. And so far, my best was I reached 4. It's a big distance to cover, but they really are a cornerstone of the community. And I just want to acknowledge how hard it was for legions. I watched that in my own riding when COVID hit, to even ask for help. And, you know, I just want to acknowledge that and really respect what you said, Mr. Clark, about how forceful these groups are at figuring out how to manage things and how hard they work to make it continue and how flexible they are. I guess my next question for you is we have talked a lot about education and I would say more about accountability rather than punishment, and hopefully have people understand what they do in a new way. And I know for myself, I have young people in my family. I have some cousins that are younger that are serving, and you know, some of my kids' friends are also serving. And I think now that we see what's happening in Ukraine, it's becoming real to young people in a new way, because they know that people that they know may be participating in one way or another. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the desecration of any, and I want to go back to that. You outlined several desecrations that we've seen in the last few years across Canada. How do we bring this to a place where people have more ownership and understand sacrifice? And hopefully, you know, it's a terrible thing to say, but maybe out of seeing Ukraine, we will see that sort of connection to what it is to sacrifice for our country. And so I leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I have to go back to a point that was made earlier about youth connecting with veterans on site at a memorial and learning and understanding. That is a key component to developing this awareness and this education, making that connection. And I think that if that can be encouraged, and this is one of the reasons why the Legion does not support Remembrance Day as being a national holiday, because we want students to be able to attend these ceremonies with veterans to understand, and the veterans explaining what the memorial means and stands for is paramount.
Thank you, Ms. Blinet. Thank you, Mr. Clark. And we're going to have two other interventions for 5 minutes each. And we're going to start with Mr. Fraser-Tolmie. MP Fraser-Tolmie, please open your mic and go ahead, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Clark, for joining us today. And as a past service member to another service member, we always think about that thing that's placed in our memory, which is our service number. So Kilo 62209053. I want to say thank you very much for your passion and your commitment to being part of remembering those who have gone before us, those who have served. Not everybody in our military is engaged in combat, but they do serve with the understanding that they are putting their lives on the line. Over the last couple of weeks, as we have been hearing witnesses and testimonies, we know that there has been a history of desecration, and you have brought that up in your role. You have witnessed that numerous times. Am I correct?
Absolutely, yes. Fortunately, not numerous times, but aware of numerous incidents.
Yeah, and it's so. This is just not isolated to one area, but it is across Canada. Am I correct in saying that?
You are correct. Yes.
And then, you know, I think that one thing that needs to be highlighted here is that there seems to be a different motive or a different reason or that these desecrations happen across Canada. Would you agree with me on that?
There would be different reasons, whether it's simply an act of willful vandalism or an accident.
Right.
There's still desecration. It doesn't diminish the act of disrespecting the monument.
Yeah, absolutely, and I 100% agree with you. Desecration is a desecration, and what I'm sad to hear as we sit in these discussions is that that this is an ongoing issue that is happening across our country. Which is very disappointing. And I think some of the comments that have been brought forward by my fellow colleagues within my party and across the table is about education. You mentioned freedom, and you spoke about what freedom means to you. Would you say that that is the only definition of freedom, or that others have a different meaning of freedom?
I would say people have their own interpretation of what freedom is and how they have experienced it, felt it. Some people perhaps to a lesser extent than others. Mm-hmm. Everyone in essence is free, but how you express that freedom or how you feel of that freedom will vary between individuals.
Yeah, and so that brings me to that education component of not just, you know, on Remembrance Day going to a cenotaph and, you know, hearing, but, you know, the education process of what people went through, what their sacrifices were, what they encountered, how that impacted them, and what a new lease on life. You know, I think about my grandfather when he came back from, he was in the British Army, and he was part of the British Expeditionary Force. And how he went over, you know, to Europe, and the constant combat, the loss of friends, and to come back and have a new lease on life. I think it's so important for people to hear that and at an early age. Would you agree with me on that?
Absolutely, yes. But that transition is difficult for some. And those who make a successful transition, it's wonderful to see. But there are others who are challenged, and it's not so easy for them. But it's important that they do transition back to civilian life and continue on in society.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to one comment that you made, that repeat offender. I mean, I am a repeat offender with speeding tickets and parking tickets. But when I went through my driver's education, I was told not to speed. And so even though we do want to educate our people, our children, our future, you know, we're human, and people, you know, do have they just go off the rails sometimes. So, you know, I just think that that's something that's important that we have. Would you agree with that statement, sir?
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. And now, for 5 minutes, we have MP Wilson Miao. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, my colleague, and thank you, Mr. Clark, for joining us today with this important study. I have great respect to all the veterans, especially in my riding. We do have a centropath in my riding. And knowing, you spoke about the virtual poppy drop projection, which I seen first time last November. That was projected in the center block. And I think it's a very stunning and solemn reminder of all the sacrifices our veterans have given to Canada. Could you see this idea working anywhere else in Canada? Or do you have any exciting plans for similar type of ceremonies that can engage with Canadians of all backgrounds and age with this projection at the Parliament Hill?
We have been very fortunate to partner with some wonderful organizations, sporting clubs, activities across the country. In Winnipeg, for example, during hockey games in the Remembrance Period, they project that a variation of the poppy drop around the rink, around the arena, on the ice before the players are skating. And rinks across the country are doing the same thing. There is such an appetite for remembrance across the country, especially during the Remembrance Period. And people, organizations are so willing to undertake that. It's something that we feel is important, and also important is reaching out to youth. We have been very successful of the last number of years engaging with the Fortnite digital gaming platform to provide interactive remembrance, nonviolent activity for youth so that they can learn. We're taking remembrance to where they are. A few years ago, in the last couple of years, we have done this at 11 p.m. as opposed to 11 a.m. because that's when gamers are online. So we're always cognizant of our audience, the new younger generation, I'll put it that way. And we want to make sure that we take every opportunity we can to promote the remembrance theme.
Well, thank you, Mr. Clark. I really like the idea of getting more youth engaged, especially creating more awareness and allowing them to understand what really happened in our history and showing the respect we should. And I see that Legion is working in tandem with our war and veteran memorials as being the strongest way we can have to remember our fallen and to better serve those veterans who did come home. What can we do better to support our legions across Canada? And how has our government worked with local legions and the Royal Canadian Legion's main office to better advance the need of legions and veterans?
On a grand scale is simply taking care of veterans. And again, Veterans Affairs Canada has been very good at providing supports, benefits, assistance to those who require it. And that's something that we continually advocate for, is making sure that the availability of resources and assistance is there for veterans when they need it. Most recently, the government announced the additional $140 million to keep on 595 temporary workers so that disability claims can be continued. The backlog of pending applications will be reduced. That is the best way that a government can assist veterans, is by taking care of them. The Legion will be there. They'll help. The government also needs to provide that assistance, and very happy to see it.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Clark, for sharing that. It is a good news for all veterans across Canada with what we have been doing as a government. Do you see any other plans that we can engage more with the newer generation or newcomers to Canada to allow them to engage with our veterans in the coming future?
A lot of it turns back to awareness. We have heard from individuals, new Canadians that have come to the country, they didn't understand what the poppy was. So we are taking opportunities every chance we get to talk about the meaning of the poppy and the various remembrance initiatives and representations that we have. It again speaks to that education. I look back to 2015 when Ipsos did a poll on the 100th anniversary of the writing of In Flanders Fields about John McCrae and In Flanders Fields. Only 61% of the respondents were able to identify that McCrae wrote In Flanders Fields. 24% of the people didn't know it was a Canadian that wrote the poem and it was written during the First World War. We can do better.
Merci. Merci,
Thank
MP.
you.
Thank you very much, Member Miao. Well, this is where we must bring this to an end. In the name of the members of our Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, I would like to thank you, Mr. Stephen Clark, National Executive Director of the Royal Canadian Legion. And I, like all other members have before me, I wish to tell you that I respect you deeply and I wish to thank you for your service.
You are very eloquent also when you speak. So thank you so much, Mr. Clark, and for your participation in our study. Thank you.
Thank you. The pleasure has been mine.
Thank you. Alors, chers membres du comité, nous allons donc...
Kind committee members, we will suspend for about 5 minutes, no more than 10. And I will invite you to rejoin us using the appropriate link, given that we will continue with the business meeting. See you soon.
you.